What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another Pokemon TCG Pocket video. So in yesterday's video, I did a meta report tier list that was based off of tournament data and objective data. So that was a more data focused sort of tier list, and this is going to be just a more for fun sort of subjective tier list. We are ranking the EX Pokemon, not necessarily the decks they represent, but the Pokemon themselves. I am going to discuss the decks that they play in, of course, but mainly just focusing on the Pokemon themselves. So again, this is just going to be kind of more for fun. So, without further ado, let's just go ahead and get into it. So we have all the EX Pokemon here organized by type. So starting off with the grass Pokemon, we got Venusaur EX here, and grass decks in general are just kind of good right now, right? Because of Darkrai EX. Grass decks are naturally favored into Darkrai EX, as well as they just have a bunch of heals with Erica, plus the addition of Giant Cape. Venusaur gets even more consistent with Pokemon communication. I think I'm going to go ahead and put Venusaur into B tier. I think Venusaur is good right now in the meta. Again, just because grass type cards are good right now, but I still think it is kind of slow since it is a stage 2 evolution and it does require 4 energy to attack for only 100 damage, which is not a whole lot for 4 energy. It does heal itself for 30, which is very nice as well, but sometimes that healing doesn't even really play into some matchups such as Charizard EX, where it doesn't matter how much HP you heal, Charizard could just blow you away in one hit, right? So Venusaur is good, but it's at B tier for me. Moving on, we got Executor EX here. This is an easy S tier. This is one of the best EX Pokemon in the game right now. Just being able to evolve first, if you're going first, stage 1 evolution, attack for 1 energy, dealing 40 to 80 damage, has 160 HP, so it's really bulky. It's really hard to take down for decks that can't output a lot of damage into one attack. So just an easy S tier, one of the best EX Pokemon in the game right now. Next up, we have Celebi EX. So Celebi EX on its own is pretty good. The thing is, it gets better once you play it with Superior, right? Because you can ramp up all that energy. But actually, Celebi has kind of taken a backseat this format, and it's more actually a supporter card to Executor, where last season it was kind of the reverse, right? Where like Celebi was the main card in the deck, and then you would either play it with like Superior as support or Executor EX as support, or sometimes both, right? But Celebi EX is still good on its own. I'm going to go ahead and put it into A tier. I think it's just a little bit below Executor EX, where Executor EX, like, you can put this card into literally any grass deck and it's going to be better, right? Where Celebi EX, it might not fit into exactly every grass deck. It could, but I think it's just not as good as Executor EX. But of course, when paired together, they are a very, very deadly combo. And then we got the newest grass type EX, which is Yanmega EX. So Yanmega EX is pretty good. It is a grass type Pokemon, but it attacks for colorless energy, so you can fit it into literally any deck. I've played it in grass type decks. I've seen people play it in steel type decks, right, with Dialga. I've seen people play it in lightning type decks with Magnezone, right? So you can literally play this card in anything. 120 damage for 3 energy is pretty good. It just kind of sucks that it discards an energy. So that's why it is mainly played with Dialga. That way you ramp a bunch of energy onto it and then you can just consistently attack with it. I think I'm going to go ahead and put this into A tier as well. I think it's a really solid card. Stage 1 evolution. Has a decent amount of HP, 140, but the 120 means that it can one-shot Darkrai EX because of the type advantage there. And one thing to note real quick is I'm not necessarily ranking these in order of the tiers, right? Like, I'm not necessarily saying Celebi is better than Yanmega or vice versa. So the order within the tiers doesn't necessarily matter is what I'm trying to say. So moving on to fire decks. So Charizard EX. Charizard right now is probably the best fire deck, I would say. I mean, yeah, it is the best fire deck, but I still think Charizard is kind of slow right now. Kind of the same problem with Venusaur EX is that it is a stage 2 evolution. It is kind of slow, We do have Pokemon communication, which makes it more consistent. But I think my biggest issue with Charizard decks is that it just relies on Moltres so heavily. Like, you have to play Moltres to ramp that energy with Charizard. So I'm going to go ahead and put Charizard into the B tier for now. I think it is a good deck. It's still really strong. It potentially could creep up into A tier, but as of right now, I'm going to put it into B tier just because it is still slow and it is just heavily reliant on the Moltres, and it can lose pretty bad to water decks, which a bunch of people are playing Palkia right now. And moving on to Arcanine EX, this card is pretty much fallen off the meta. I don't want to say it's like unplayable or terrible. I've actually tried playing some decks with Arcanine EX lately, but it's just not very good because it deals 120 damage to itself when it attacks. And then we have a lot of things doing chip damage in the meta right now. Darkrai, Greninja, Druddigon. So the 150 HP on Arcanine dwindles down very, very fast. You can put a giant cape on him to kind of help mitigate that, but still, it's not that great. I'm going to go ahead and put him into C tier. I don't think he's like as like terrible, like completely terrible as like D tier. So I'm going to put him in C tier. He's just like okay. Next up, we have Moltres EX. For me, Moltres EX, this is an S tier card. This is basically like an every fire deck, I guess, maybe except Blaine or like Infernape decks, which we'll talk about in a second. But even then, you can still play this in Infernape or Blaine, right? And this card is absolutely required for Charizard. You can play it with Arcanine as well. This card is just the only way to ramp fire energy in the game at the moment. So for that reason, I'm putting it into S tier. One other thing to note is that it's weak to electric types. So there's not a whole lot of lightning in the meta right now. I know a lot of people are playing Magnezone. So there is Magnezone in the meta, but lightning decks specifically, not a lot of people are playing lightning decks. So that's actually pretty good for Moltres. And then moving on to Infernape EX. Infernape EX is kind of a weird one. I really want to make this card work. I've been trying to make a good deck with it, but I really can't. I don't know. It's weird because on paper, this card should be really strong, right? It has 170 HP, attacks for only 2 energy for 140 damage, which is nuts, and it has a free retreat cost. But it's going to discard all fire energy on it after it attacks. So you want to play this with like Dawn. That way you can move energy to it and then you can attack 2 turns in a row with this Pokemon. But yeah, I don't know. This card is kind of weird. I don't think it's as bad as Arcanine. If I had to choose between like an Arcanine deck and an Infernape deck right now, I would rather play Infernape. I'm going to go ahead and put this into B tier. I think Charizard still is the best fire deck as of right now, but I think Infernape has potential. I think maybe we just need some more fire cards to support it. Moving on to the water cards. So Blastoise is kind of a weird one here. I played a lot of Blastoise in the first 2 formats. I will admit I haven't played Blastoise yet in this format, but I felt like Blastoise last format was really good and people were kind of sleeping on Blastoise. I had a Blastoise deck where I played in a tournament with it with the basic Articuno and Mew EX, and I got first place in the Swiss rounds. I ended up losing in the top cut as per usual for me, right? That's usually what happens when I enter tournaments. But I went like, I don't remember. I think it was like 5-0 or something like that, or 6-0 in the Swiss rounds with that Blastoise deck. It was just absolutely nuts. And Blastoise got even better with cards like Pokemon Communication, Manaphy, right? Being able to ramp water energy more consistently. But with all that being said, I haven't really seen like any competitive Blastoise decks right now at the moment. I'm going to go ahead and put this into B tier for now, just sort of like in the middle. I think it could move up to A tier potentially, or it could also potentially move down to C tier, but I think B tier is good for now with potential into A tier. Then we have Starmie EX. Starmie EX is still really good in my opinion. 130 HP is kind of low, but being able to attack for just 2 energy, 90 damage, free retreat is really, really nice. But yeah, the fact that it has low HP is kind of holding it back now, since I imagine Starmie EX is probably kind of bad into Darkrai decks, right? And then of course this is going to get one shot by Magnezone. So I think Starmie EX in particular is going to be like really bad against Darkrai Magnezone decks, but a lot of people have been hopping off of Darkrai Magnezone lately for in favor of Darkrai Greninja, which in my opinion Darkrai Greninja is the better Darkrai deck. So I don't know, Starmie is kind of a weird one. I might even, you know, this might be weird, but I might even put Starmie in C. I think I'm going to put Starmie in C, which is kind of hard to say because last format, I would have put it like A, maybe even S. But I think due to the fact that it has low HP and it gets one shot by Magnezone, makes Starmie kind of weak, unfortunately, in this current format. Next up, we have Articuno. Articuno, you know, it's been good since day one, being able to attack for 2 energy for 40 damage, and then 3 energy, 80 damage. Got even better with the 18 trainer deck since we got more trainer cards, Pokemon tools, and all that. This is just a solid card, right? You can fit into any water deck pretty much. So for that reason, I'm going to put it into the A tier. Now, Lapras EX. Oh no, Lapras. Poor Lapras. We have our first D tier Pokemon in Lapras EX. I think this is the worst EX Pokemon in the entire game, unfortunately. It has 140 HP, which is okay, but not a whole lot. You can push it up to 160 with a Magic Cape. It attacks for 3 energy, Bubble Drain, and then it's going to heal 20 damage. So it's a very weak attack for 3 energy, and it does heal, but still, like, I don't know. It just takes a while to get set up with the Lapras EX. And then in some situations, the heals aren't even going to matter. Sometimes you might just get one shot by things, such as like a Charizard or like a Palkia EX, right? And I think what really, really hurts Lapras the most here is actually the retreat cost of 3. I think that's probably the biggest downside to Lapras EX, is that we don't have a way to retreat this for free, because even with Leaf, we still have to have 1 energy on the Lapras to retreat it, and then we lose that 3rd energy, right? So for all of those reasons, I'm putting Lapras into D tier. Hopefully this card can get some more support later on in the future, because I really like this card. I think it's a cool concept, but yeah, unfortunately it's very, very bad. All right, now moving on to Gyarados EX. Gyarados is kind of a weird one, right? Because it was one of the best decks in the game last season, but now I think you're probably better off just playing like Darkrai. Honestly, I think Darkrai is just a better Gyarados EX at this point, because Gyarados attacks for 140 damage for 4 energy, and yes, you can ramp that with Misty or Manaphy, right? But Darkrai EX, when you take a look at him, he's kind of doing the same thing, because he attacks for 80 damage for 3 energy, and then when you attach an energy to Darkrai, he's dealing 20 damage. So 3 energy is going to be 60 damage, plus his 80 damage attack is 140 damage total, which is the same as Gyarados, but Darkrai requires 1 less energy, and Darkrai is a basic, right? You have to evolve the Magikarp into Gyarados, so that is sort of a problem. 100 HP is very high, though. That is really, really good. That's going to survive a lot of stuff in the meta right now. Only things that could one-shot this is like Charizard EX and maybe a Zapdos EX if they flip like 4 heads in a row, right? So Gyarados EX is very bulky, but I think Darkrai is just a better Gyarados, and the Magikarp is susceptible to be sniped by things like Hitmonlee, which a lot of people are still playing Hitmonlee in the meta right now. So I'll put Gyarados into B tier for now. I think it's still a good card, still a good deck, but not nearly as good as it was last season. And last up in the water decks, we got the newest water EX Pokemon, Palkia. When I first saw this, I thought, okay, yeah, this is going to be a good card, but I didn't expect how good it actually would be. It has 150 HP. It's a basic Pokemon. It does slash for 1 energy for 30 damage. And then it has its Dimensional Storm ability for 150 damage, which also attacks the bench as well. This is just an all-around great water Pokemon that you can just, again, fit into any water deck, right? I'm going to go ahead and put this into the S tier, actually, because I think Palkia EX is actually amazing. Like this Pokemon just has so much utility to it, right? It can be an early game attacker with its slash attack. It can be a tank for you, just tank some damage with the 150 HP, and then it has its end game finishing attack with the 150 Dimensional Storm while also attacking the bench. So this is just an all-around great EX Pokemon. So yeah, I'm putting this one into S tier. Moving on to the lightning Pokemon. Oh man, this is sad to see because I was a huge Pikachu EX fan in the last format. Pikachu EX, you know, last format I would have put him at S tier, but now this pains me to do it. I think I'm going to put him at C tier. I think I'm going to put him at C tier because 120 HP is just so squishy right now. This dies to a Darkrai so easily, right? You just attach a couple energy onto Darkrai and then you attack the Pikachu and he's just dead. And then one thing you could do with lightning decks is that all the lightning Pokemon had a retreat cost of 1, at least like the main ones you would play in Pikachu decks. You can attack with the Pikachu and then you can retreat it back to your bench, maybe attack with something else, put Pikachu back in, right? Now, with the addition of Cyrus, you can't really do that anymore because if Pikachu takes damage, you retreat it back to the bench, your opponent just pulls it back to the active spot with Cyrus and they score 2 points on you. So, yeah, Cyrus really hurts Pikachu EX a lot. Darkrai hurts Pikachu EX. There's a bunch of fighting decks around as well still, which Lightning is weak to fighting. So yeah, Pikachu EX unfortunately is going to be in the C tier for me. Next up, we got Zapdos EX here. Now, Zapdos is kind of an interesting one. This is one you can kind of put into any Lightning deck, right? It was always mostly paired with Pikachu EX. It's still an all-around good card, right? Kind of similar to Palkia EX, not exactly as good as Palkia EX. It has 130 HP, which again is a little bit on the lower side. It can attack for 1 energy for 20 damage, and then it has its coin flip attack for 3 energy. You're flipping 4 coins, dealing 50 damage for each heads, and it is weak to lightning, which is good to note as well. It was really good to lean into Zapdos EX when you would play a Pikachu deck and you'd queue up against a fighting deck, and then you would want your Zapdos EX out there, right? Because he's weak to lightning and not fighting. I think Zapdos is still okay. It's still good. It's not amazing. I'm going to go ahead and put it into B tier since it is just a good, flexible lightning card that you can play in just about any lightning deck. And last up, we got Pachirisu EX. Now, this guy, I still have not pulled this guy, unfortunately, so I'm going to be honest, I have not played with him. But from what I have seen, he's just kind of similar to Pikachu EX. He's just a little bit more consistent, maybe with the Pokemon tools being able to deal 80 damage if he has a Pokemon tool attached. But again, that 120 HP is just really, really low. So in my eyes, he's kind of similar to Pikachu EX, right? He's kind of better in some ways, worse in other ways. I'm going to go ahead and put him next to Pikachu, put him into C tier, unfortunately. But again, I will be honest, I have not played with this card yet, so this could go higher or maybe even lower. Now moving on to the Psychic Pokemon, we got a lot here, starting off with Gengar EX. Now, putting my bias aside, I love Gengar. I love this card. I think it is... I'm not going to say it's amazing. I think it's good. I think people hate on Gengar a little too much. I think he's a little too overhated. People like to say, like, this is the worst EX Pokemon in the game. This is not worse than Lapras. Believe me, this is not worse than Lapras. So 170 HP is a really good amount. It has its ability where it prevents your opponent from playing supporter cards as long as this is in the active spot. And I think that's one of those abilities that's just going to get better over time, right? Because it's not like they're going to remove supporter cards from the game. They're going to keep adding supporter cards to this game. So in turn, Gengar EX is going to get more value as the game goes on, right? The only kind of downside here is that it is a stage 2, so it's a little bit slow, and then attacks for 3 psychic energy for 100 damage, which is a little bit on the weaker end for 3 energy. But you still can make Gengar a little bit more consistent with Pokemon communication. Mythical Slab, I have seen him played with Dusknoir, which is really cool. I haven't tried the Dusknoir build of the version yet, but I did play a lot of Gengar in the previous 2 sets, so I'm going to put him into C tier. I don't think he's on the same level as Lapras. Lapras is really bad, but Gengar, I think he's a C tier. He's okay. And then Mewtwo. Oh man, Mewtwo is a weird one because Mewtwo easy would have been S tier the last format, but now Darkrai essentially just pushed him out of the meta like completely. Like this guy just absolutely just disappeared from the meta, right? I think he's still a good card like on his own on paper. It's just that this particular format is not really good for Mewtwo because it loses to Darkrai so hard, right? And because with the addition of Giant Cape in the metagame, his 150 damage side drive, it's not going to be able to one-shot everything now if a Pokemon has a Giant Cape attached onto it, because there are a lot of Pokemon that have 140 HP. You put a Giant Cape on it, pushes it to 160. So I don't know, man. Mewtwo's kind of like, I don't know. It's not terrible, but I would not recommend playing Mewtwo at all this meta. This feels weird also, but I'm gonna put Mewtwo in C tier. This is so weird, right? We have Pikachu and Mewtwo, two of the best decks the last format. Would have been S tier easily, but I'm putting them in C tier. I would not recommend playing Mewtwo at all right now. Okay, now we got an interesting one. This is Mew EX, which was introduced in Mythical Island. This was sort of the flagship card for Mythical Island. Mew is a really good card. It's a psychic type Pokemon, 130 HP. It can deal 20 damage for 1 psychic energy. But the most interesting aspect about Mew EX is its genome hacking ability. For 3 colorless energy, it can copy your opponent's active Pokemon's attack. So you can play Mew into literally any deck, which makes it very flexible. It can serve as a tank. It can also just counter some matchups for you, right? Like you can use genome hacking to counter a Charizard EX, or it can use it to counter a Palkia. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm actually putting Mew into S tier. I think Mew is amazing, honestly. The fact that the genome hacking takes colorless energy means you can fit this into literally any deck. And so for that flexibility, I'm going to go ahead and put Mew into the S tier. All right, now moving on, we got Miss Magius EX. So this one, I will admit this card I still have not pulled as well. But from what I have seen, this is just an okay EX Pokemon. Being able to attack for 2 energy for 70 damage is not bad, and it does confuse your opponent's Pokemon, which is kind of just like a slightly worse version of Sleep, right? They flip a coin, and then if tails, the attack does nothing. But if the Pokemon is confused, they can still retreat. Where with Sleep, like with Wigglytuff EX, if your opponent's Pokemon is asleep, they can't retreat. So Confuse is a little bit weird. It's kind of just like a slightly worse version of Sleep, kind of. I think I'm going to put this into the C tier again. I think Psychic type Pokemon in general are just not very good right now, with the exception of Mew. But again, since it's weak to Dark, Darkrai just eats this card alive, right? So I think it's okay. Again, not on the same tier as Lapras EX. All right, and the last Psychic Pokemon, we got the second promo EX Pokemon, which is Cresselia EX. It's kind of the inverse of Darkrai EX. They have the same HP amount. They both attack for 3 energy, both deal 80 damage, both retreat for 2. And Cresselia EX has an ability where whenever you attach a psychic energy to it, you heal for 20. So on paper, this ability is pretty good, but again, there's just a lot of Pokemon that can kind of one-shot Cresselia EX, right? I mean, you can attach a magic cape to it, and then you can play this with Gardevoir to heal it twice every turn, right? Which would be really nice. It's kind of similar to the Lapras as well, right? Where it has the same HP, same damage for 3 energy, and Lapras heals when it attacks. Cresselia heals when you put energy on it. But also, when you put more energy on it, you're kind of susceptible to things like Gallade EX, right? Which, you know, there's not a whole lot of Gallade EX in the meta, but, you know, a decent amount of people are playing it. Cresselia is kind of bad. I don't think it's terrible. But I would say right now, in this current meta, it's not a very good card. I'm going to put it... Ooh, it's either C or D. I think I'm going to put it next to Lapras. I'm putting it next to Lapras. Lapras got a companion in the D tier. I think these are the two worst EX Pokemon in the game right now. Again, I don't think Cresselia is like terrible. I just think this format right now is not the perfect format for it. All right, moving on to the fighting type Pokemon. We got Machamp EX. I've played a ton of Machamp EX, and I'm going to say right now, I think Machamp EX is C tier. I think this card is good when you go second and you got everything on curve, right? You got Machop, attack, next turn, evolve, Machoke, attack, next turn, Machamp, attack, and then you're dealing a lot of damage. But if you're going first, this card feels really bad. I don't like that it has a high retreat cost of 3, and then Machop and Machoke have a retreat cost of 2, so you kind of want to play Leaf with this card. Or if you don't, you just don't have any pivot ability in your deck. So I don't know. Machamp EX, I really like this card, and it can feel really good going second when you get all your pieces. But that's like a perfect world scenario, right? You're not going to go second every game. You're not going to draw into every card you need every game. So for me, it's a C tier. Next up is Marowak EX. This one's pretty easy for me. All the fighting Pokemon are pretty easy for me because I played a lot of fighting decks. Marowak's an easy C tier as well. It's a little bit better and a little bit worse than Machamp EX in some regards, right? It's a stage 1 Pokemon, so it's faster, but it has less HP than Machamp, but it attacks for 2 energy instead of 3 energy, and it can deal up to 160 damage, but it could also deal as low as 0 damage. And I think the fact that this can deal 0 damage for its floor just makes this Pokemon not so reliable. Like when you flip 1 heads or 2 heads on Marowak, it feels really good, right? But there are going to be games where you're flipping double tails and you're just doing 0 damage with Marowak, and it feels really, really bad. And not to mention, he is weak to grass type Pokemon as well, which, yeah, there's a lot of grass Pokemon up here in the tier list, right? We got 1 in S, 2 in A, and 1 in B. So yeah, Marowak EX, C tier for me. Then we got Aerodactyl EX. Aerodactyl EX, I think, is actually pretty good. I think I'm going to put it in B tier. I think it could potentially go into A tier. I haven't seen like a ton of successful like competitive Aerodactyl decks right now, but I think Aerodactyl EX is still really good. It's weak to lightning, so it's not weak to the usual psychic or grass types like other EX Pokemon are, and then it attacks for only 2 energy for 80 damage, which honestly I think Aerodactyl is just a better Marowak, right? Like if I had to choose between Aerodactyl EX and Marowak EX, right? Where Marowak EX can attack for 0 to 80 to 160 damage for 2 energy, or Aerodactyl just attacks for a flat 80 damage for 2 energy. I'm picking Aerodactyl every single time. I value that consistency very, very high. And also the fact that it has its ability Primeval Law, I think is actually more relevant than ever now. If you don't know what this ability does, essentially your opponent can't evolve their Pokemon that's in the active spot. Now that's not always going to be relevant because a lot of decks do like to evolve Pokemon in the back line, right? But this is going to come up sometimes where your opponent might start off with an Executor EX and they can't evolve it in the active spot. So that ability can be really powerful. So I think Aerodactyl EX is actually really good, and yeah, he's B tier for now. I could potentially see him moving up to A tier, though. And the fact that he evolves from a fossil means that the deck is more consistent with the fossils as well. All right, and lastly, we have Gallade EX for fighting decks. If you watch some of my previous videos, you know I love playing Gallade EX. This is probably one of my favorite Pokemon in the game right now. I'm going to put this into B tier right next to Aerodactyl. I know people kind of say this card sucks. I disagree. I think this card is really, really good for a few different reasons. So the first reason this card's really good is it has 170 HP. That means it's going to be surviving a lot of hits, right? It's going to survive something like a Palkia EX Dimensional Storm. It's going to survive like a Yan Mega Air Slash, right? And then it is a stage 2 evolution, so it is a little bit slow, and sometimes there are some issues with the consistency, but we do have Pokemon communication to kind of help offset that. But also what I like with Gallade EX is that that this card does not mind going first or second, because if you're going first, you can evolve first. You play Ralts, next turn you evolve into Curlia, and then the next turn after that you evolve into Galadiax, and you're ready to attack, right? But then if you go second, well then you can just start off with another Pokemon in your deck, like a Hitmonchan or Hitmonlee or whatever, and start attacking first, build up Galadiax in the back line. So that's why I really like this card. I think it's really flexible, and this is going to be really good against cards that like to stack a lot of energy onto Pokemon. So cards that get kind of greedy with their energy, like Moltres ramping a lot of energy onto Charizard, maybe a Celebi has a bunch of energy stacked onto it, or a Palkia or Articuno have a bunch of water energy stacked onto it. Gallade EX, its attack is going to scale with how much energy is on your opponent's active Pokemon. But on the downside, this is also going to be kind of weak against Pokemon that attack for low energy, such as Exeggutor EX, which is very prevalent in the meta right now. This is only going to deal 70 damage plus 1 energy for an extra 20 damage. So dealing only 90 damage to Exeggutor EX is not very good, especially since they can just heal with Erica and potions, right? So Gallade EX, I think it is a good card. It just might not be the best meta right now for Gallade EX. All right, now moving on to the Dark type EX Pokemon. We only got 2 here. We got Weavile and Darkrai. Weavile, again, this is one, unfortunately, I have not pulled yet, but I think it's still an okay card. I think going first with this card, doing the combo where you put an energy on Darkrai, use Dawn, and then attach it to the Weavile, attack for 70 damage plus the 20 from the Darkrai, is one of the strongest things you can do in the entire game right now. I'm going to put Weavile into B right now. I think it could potentially go down to C as well. It could, yeah, it could kind of fall into either one here. I think this card was really good at the start of this expansion, but then once people started experimenting with other things, it kind of fell down a little bit. And it is weak to grass type, which kind of sucks, right? This card is going to get absolutely stomped by Yanmega, Celebi, Exeggutor, all of these big grass Pokemon, right? So this is a B tier Pokemon in my eyes, maybe C tier, but I'm going to give it the benefit of the doubt and put it into B tier. I think it's good. And then Darkrai EX here. This is going to be an easy S tier for me. This card is absolutely cracked, dealing damage every time you put an energy on it. It has 140 HP. It attacks for 80 damage. This card is just absolutely cracked. This guy alone just pushed Psychic decks out of the meta. Yeah, not too much else to say here other than Darkrai EX is really, really good. Now moving on to Metal. We only have one Metal EX Pokemon, and that is Dialga EX. I haven't played with Dialga EX a whole bunch. This is a card that can be used in a few different decks, right? You can play this with Melmetal. You can play this with Yanmega. You can play this with really any card that sort of wants to ramp energy onto it, right? Like you can even play this with these normal type EX Pokemon right here, actually, Wigglytuff, Pidgeot, and Licky. The most popular version I've seen of Dialga is Dialga Yanmega, since you can just ramp energy onto your Yanmega. So Dialga, I think it's an okay Pokemon. I don't think it's as good as we thought it would be. I thought this card was going to be absolutely cracked, but I was wrong. I will admit about that. I think it's still a good card. It's just not like amazing or anything. So I'm going to go ahead and just put it into the B tier for now. All right, and now we got the normal EX Pokemon. So Wigglytuff EX. I got to put my bias aside here because I really like this card. I really like Wigglytuff a lot. It's not that great. It's not that great. I really like this card, but it has 140 HP, which is not a whole lot. It attacks for 3 colorless energy for 80 damage. So you can put this into any deck, which is nice, but 80 damage for only 3 energy is not very strong. And it does put your opponent's active Pokemon to sleep. Now, this is one of those cards where it really kind of relies on the coin flips, right? Like if you put your opponent's Pokemon to sleep, sometimes that can be game winning if they just don't flip heads and they don't wake up. But sometimes your opponent just keeps waking up. They just keep flipping heads and this just feels useless, right? So I'm going to go ahead and put this into C tier. Putting my bias aside, I really like this card, but yeah, I think it's kind of similar to kind of similar to Marowak EX a little bit, where it relies on the coin flips. Like, this is dealing 80 damage consistently, which is nice, but the coin flips on the sleep condition can be kind of inconsistent. And as well, it's weak to fighting type Pokemon, which is good to note because people are playing a bunch of different like Lucario decks and fighting type decks, right? All right, and then Pidgeot EX. I played it a lot the last format. I haven't played it at all this format, but I think Pidgeot EX is still good, right? It is a stage 2 Pokemon, but we do have the Pokemon communications to help look for our pieces there. It has 170 HP, which is actually really good. Attacks for 3 colorless energy, so fit into any deck. And then it does 80 damage, and then it's going to do 20 more damage depending on how many benched Pokemon your opponent has. So potentially can do 140 damage if your opponent has a full bench. It is really good. I just haven't seen a whole lot of people experiment with it so far this season. Let me know if you have any good Pidgeot EX decks. I would be curious as to see what people are playing. I know towards the end of the last format, people were playing Pidgeot EX like in fighting decks, right, with like Hitmonlee and Marshadow, and that was actually really good. It felt really strong at the end of the format last season. I'm gonna go ahead and put Pidgeot EX into B tier for now because I think it is a good card still, but I just haven't seen it played a whole lot this season. But I think it does have potential to kind of move around the tier list, like up or down, right? I would say like this is kind of like a big wild card for me, but for now I'm gonna put it into B tier. And finally, we got Licky EX, so 160 HP. It's gonna deal 100 damage for 4 energy. Flip a coin until you get tails. This attack does 40 more damage for each head. It's kind of inconsistent with the coin flips. It takes 4 energy to attack, which is very expensive, and it takes 4 energy to retreat it as well. So once you put this guy in the active spot, he's probably staying there until he either wins the game or gets KO'd. So this one, I'm gonna put it in C tier. Yeah, this one is kind of the same thing as like Wigglytuff and Marowak, right? Kind of relies on the coin flips, but also you need to pair Licky with something that can ramp energy, right? That's why people play him mainly with Dialga from what I've seen. So yeah, I mean, he has the potential. If you just flip a bunch of heads, you can do an absurd amount of damage with Licky. But again, that is just a perfect world scenario, right? So for me, he's going to be a C tier Pokemon. All right, and that's it for the tier list. What do you guys think of my tier list? I know there's probably going to be a lot of people who disagree here, or maybe you do agree with me. We got 5 Pokemon in S tier, only 3 in the A tier, a lot in B and C, and then a couple in D tier. Again, I think maybe some of these could move around a little bit, especially like B tier. I feel like B tier is kind of like the most sort of flexible, where they could jump up into A tier or possibly jump down to C tier as well. But again, this is just mostly subjective. This is just mostly for fun, my personal opinion. So if you disagree with me, hey, you know what? That's fine. You have your opinions. I got mine. Anyways, thanks for watching. If you missed the meta report tier list, which is based on more objective data and tournament data, I'll leave a link to that video in the description of the video, maybe a pinned comment as well if you want to check out that video. And yeah, thanks for watching. Appreciate you all, and I'll see you in the next one. Later.